For the resemblance was, in its own fashion, infinite, so that almost you could wonder at finding no sorrows in his brow and no wounds in his hands and feet. Yet there was no danger of mistaking, not one moment of confusion, no least sally of the will towards forbidden reverence. Where likeness was greatest, mistake was least possible.
This is Pints with Jack, Season 8, Episode 21. After Hours with Dr. Junius Johnson. Welcome, friends, to Pints with Jack, your favourite CSOS podcast run by three Thalcandrians. In our last episode, we finished the final chapter of Perelandra, but today we return once more to that chapter in our first After Hours episode of the season. Today, I am joined by Dr. Junius Johnson, who, upon finding out that we were going through Perelandra, he requested, or strongly suggested, that he should come on and talk to us about this final chapter. Dr. Johnson has been on the show before, back when we were discussing the sequel to Out of the Silent Planet, The Dark Tower. And on his website, juniusjohnson.com, he is described thus. Dr. Junius Johnson is a Yale-trained scholar of theology, philosophy, and literature who devotes his time to thinking and writing about whatever is good, noble, and excellent, and how to bring these things to bear to nurturing meaningful lives. He is a prolific writer, an engaging speaker, an inspiring teacher, and a passionate musician. Dr. Johnson, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's so good to be here again.
Absolutely. And congratulations on being the very first guest of Season 8. I'm really pleased that we could make this happen.
Thanks. Yeah, this is really exciting to be here, and I'm looking forward to more good things to come.
Well, I read the blurb from your website, but is there anything else you think our listeners should know either about you, your history with Lewis, or Perelandra?
Lewis has been changing my life for as long as I can remember. When I was in, I think, kindergarten, I was read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe in school. And the moment Lucy stepped through that wardrobe, my sense of the world changed irrevocably. And then later on, when I became a Christian in my teenager years, I discovered Lewis's nonfiction, and I began reading that stuff. And that became foundational for how I thought about the world as a Christian. And so he has the distinct privilege of having twice in two different very influential moments in my life shaped how my thinking goes. And so he's been a lifelong conversation partner. And I've often thought of him in similar ways to how he talks about George MacDonald. I think that's probably pretty common, right? A lot of us Lewis heads, we see Lewis talking about MacDonald that way, and we're like, you're that for me. And that's really been true for me as well.
Yeah. For me, when I read what Lewis says about Fantastes, I read Fantastes with great expectations and left a little bit disappointed. And when I come back to those passages where Lewis talks about it, it's like, no, you're describing my experience of Narnia.
That's right. You've got it all wrong.
Yeah. And what about your history with Perelandra itself?
Yeah, so I remember first time I read this, I was a senior in high school. I was reading through the entire trilogy, and I really was taken with Out of the Silent Planet. I was a sci-fi buff, and so I really appreciated the old school sci-fi feel to it. And then I got to Perelandra, and I was, I think the main thing that struck me in that first reading was just, it's so beautiful. The imagery was just so rich and delightful, and I was taken in by this picture, an alternate picture of paradise. But I don't think I got that much of it.
Yeah.
I do remember being blown away when he represented the wounding of the heel and the crushing of the serpent's head, the promises from Genesis 3, that recapitulation on Perelandra. I got that one, and I thought, wow, that's incredibly cool. But not much else stuck with me from that first reading. I was much more impacted by that hideous strength, which made me long to be able to be a writer who could write allegory like that. I just was really, really impressed with what he pulled together there. And then when I went back to reread it the next time, and several years later, I think that it was fairly similar. I believe it wasn't until about my third time through, when I was actually teaching the series for the first time, that I really kind of woke up to the theological richness of Perelandra. I am, our mutual friend, Andrew Lazo's fond of saying that Till We Have Faces is Lewis's best book, and he's right about that. But Perelandra is Lewis's most theological book. Once I woke up to that dimension of it and began to see some of the things he was doing, I think it's become my favorite book of the series.
Yeah. Before we started recording, I said to you that I read Perelandra once before this season, and I just took it down in one very large gulp. And I had an identical impression. It's just like, this is beautiful. But a lot of it, flew by. And going through it chapter by chapter this season and really trying to pull it apart and talk about it, it's been exhausting. It really has. I don't think I've had a Lewis book tire me out in quite the same way. It's a good sort of tiredness. It's sort of like when you go to the gym, but you do feel kind of sore at the end of it.
Well, that's funny because that's very much like the way that Ransom feels talking with Tenedril, right? He has to go away from the conversations because he gets full up and he can't handle anymore.
Exactly. And if that's true for the book as a whole, it's even more true for the final chapter. So I'm really excited that we're going to pull this apart, draw out some of the key ideas that you think are important. But before that, let's talk about drinks. For my drink today, I'm enjoying my last Athletic Brewing non-alcoholic beer. This is called Round of Cheers. Are you drinking anything nice?
I do. I have a masala chai tea. And I wondered, I don't know if this is something that Lewis had in his lifetime or not, but I remember him talking about, there not being a book too large or a book of tea too large for him. And so I like to think that he would have enjoyed this one. This one's very ginger heavy, and so it's got some nice spice on the tongue.
Lovely. Well, cheers.
Cheers.
So probably the place to begin is motivation. Why were you so passionate about coming on the show to talk about this final chapter?
Yeah, I had a realization a couple of years ago that, as a theologian, I'm always looking for ways to get people interested in theology. This is not as apparent in our world as it used to be that theology is something one ought to be interested in. And of course, at one sense, everyone's always interested in it. I can't even go on an airplane and people next to me ask me what I do for a living, and I say I'm a theologian, and they immediately start giving me their theological opinions, even if they're not believers of any sort. A lot of times just, let me tell you why I hate the church. I was like, I don't want to hear that. But there's a sense in which, going to theology is something that I want to spend time thinking about can sometimes be a bit of a challenge. And I realized that I don't know of any more inviting and attractive invitation to the study or even just thinking about theology than this last chapter. What Lewis does is he takes some really, really huge theological ideas that have sparked massive conversations through the millennia, and he presents them so effortlessly and beautifully that you find yourself thinking, well, gosh, I'd like to know more about that. What does that look like? And you go away chewing on it for a long time. So to me, this is such a deeply satisfying chapter. And it's one where it really does repay digging down and spending a little bit more time with the individual images, because almost every paragraph opens out into a whole treatise if you really let it.
Yeah. No, I think that's beautiful. And I think in the same way that Out of the Silent Planet is drawing people into a sort of conversation that they typically don't have, namely Christianity and aliens.
Yeah.
I think Perelandra prompts conversations about the fall and the ultimate restoration that we don't normally have.
That's right. And even the questions of, what exactly did we lose in the fall? I mean, in one sense, you think, okay, well, we lost immortality and we lost the ability to act justly and whatnot. But what is this paradise that we got locked out of? Because that's a big part of the punishment. You can't come back here. And it's so important that you're not able to come back here that I'm going to say fantastical guardians at the borders to keep you out. And I really think that it's beneficial for us to reflect more on just that aspect of what we lost, because it does tell us more about who we are, who we could be, and then ultimately who we will be when there's a paradise regained at the end of history.
Well, where would you like to begin?
The very beginning of this chapter is one of my favorite bits, and this is where Ransom sees Tor and Tenedril for the first time, and they have, for the first time in their new form, I should say. She's Tor for the first time. Tenedril he's been talking to, but she's transformed, because since the last time he saw her, she has completed her testing and she has received the confirmation and grace. And so now they are something that Adam and Eve never were, something that we haven't seen in a human being yet on Thulkandra. And his reaction to them is really beautiful and really powerful, draws upon Lewis's medieval heritage. So let's start with that bit.
Yeah, it is beautiful. I just keep saying that about Perelandra, and Matt does it as well. It's like each chapter we do is like, any thoughts on this? Oh, it's just beautiful. It's just beautiful.
So this is what Ransom says when he sees them. He says, "Do not move away. Do not raise me up. I have never before seen a man or a woman. I have lived all my life among shadows and broken images. O my father and my mother, my lord and my lady, do not move, do not answer me yet. My own father and mother I have never seen. Take me for your son. We have been alone in my world for a great time. That always reminds me of the bit in the Gospels where Jesus takes a few of the apostles up the mountain and they see him transfigured. And each of the Gospels has a different metaphor for how bright Jesus is in his glorified form. And one of them, I always forget which one it is, says that his garments became whiter than anyone in this world could dye them. And I thought that's really good, right? Because I could very easily imagine, in fact, I don't have to imagine, I've done it, looking at the dingy whites of this world and mistaking them for heavenly brightness. But when you really see heavenly brightness for the first time, it's retroactive. You realize that you haven't actually been seeing white before. And you're never going to mistake anything in this world for that white again, right? And so I love the retroactiveness of Ransom's view here. He sees this man and woman and he thinks, oh, I've been mistaken. I keep calling things men and women that are at best on the way to becoming men and women.
Yeah, poor shadows, poor imitations. It reminds me of when I first went to Australia and I, for several months, was drinking real orange juice from real oranges rather than the from concentrate stuff that I grew up with.
That's right.
And it was the same. It was like, I've never drunk orange juice until now. This is the real thing. This is what I was made for. And that sort of idea appears again and again in Lewis's work. Particularly, I'm thinking in The Last Battle in The Weight of Glory. When he's pointing towards the end of man, that when we become what we are called to be, that we'd be almost tempted to worship a transformed human being because they would be radiating the divine glory so well.
You've never spoken with a mere mortal. Well, and also this reminds me of something he said in Out of the Silent Planet, talking about the light that exists between the planets. He says that the quality of it was such that it almost seemed a blasphemous libel to call the light that we know down here on Earth light. And that's that same sense of the scandal of using the word for the realities as we know them when they're meant for something so much greater. I think that Lewis keeps it always within the space of what Thomas Aquinas would consider a doctrine of analogy, that at the end of the day, he doesn't say, look, you shouldn't call us men or women because we're not like Torah and Ten but he would say, yeah, but you have to recognize that you're using that word very loosely. It is appropriate, but only just barely.
I think there is a tendency within humanity for us to regard sin as our natural state and fallenness as our natural state.
Yes. We have that expression, to err is human, right? It's like, no, it's not.
Exactly. It's not. That's not something native to what we once were and what we will eventually become.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so this to me is a beautiful picture of that. And what they have here is this confirmation in grace, which is also given to the angels when they made their choice to stand for God. And that's the thing that we are all longing for. It's the inability to sin. It's the inverse of what we have now, where we have the inability not to sin. When you have, and it's called confirmation because you get it by willing it. You get it by consistently wanting to be the type of person who doesn't sin, but you can't make yourself that person. And so the last gift of God, this side of paradise, is to give us what we've longed for. That is to say, the ability to be strong enough to stand. And for Lewis in this passage here, what's so cool about this is that it's not just a moral faculty where, okay, so should they look the same, but now they're not going to mess up anymore. It transforms their whole being. It almost, in a sense, interprets our being to ourselves to point out that sin is not just this external thing that we do, but that it's deeply involved in everything about us. And so when that's taken away, when even the ability to do that is taken away, we have to be fundamentally different than we were before.
That can take us into deep realms of free will and choice in heaven. It's like, would such a thing even be possible? I think at the very least, we can say that a choice to sin would be at least unthinkable.
Yeah, that's right. Well, and Anselm would say that ability to choose A or not A is not freedom. Freedom is the ability to choose what's just. And so our wills are less free to the extent that we have the capacity to choose contrary to the will of God. So he would see this removal of that possibility as an expansion of our freedom. And I get some dim view of what he means. I think I'm too mired in sin to really fully grasp it, but I get some dim sense of it because there's the way in which boundaries can increase freedom.
Yeah.
Right. And when you think about that when you know that you're not in danger of running into the street, you can play that much more wildly in the space. I think that something about that is possibly true of our confirmed wills in heaven.
On this podcast, we regularly have referenced Chesterton's fence, which is that
yeah.
that very thing that he talks about in Orthodoxy.
Yes.
That if you send a bunch of kids to play football near a cliff, they're going to play very timidly. They'll be cowering away from the edge. But if you put a nice big fence around where the danger is, then they can go crazy.
That's right.
And have all the fun that they want.
Yeah, that's great.
When you and I were talking about this before, you mentioned that this idea of a true humanity, and I mentioned earlier that in Lewis's essay where he says that if we see a glorified human being, we'd be tempted to worship them. This view of humanity, or whatever you would call the people that live on Perelandra, that sort of talk could set off alarm bells for people in terms of idolatry.
Yeah.
Because if we're saying that something that's not God is this close to God and fills you with the same sort of awe, are we rubbing up against idolatry? And you had some thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, this is where I have to resist the urge. I imagine you face this all the time as well, not to just read Lewis as the answer to every question. Well, here's another passage. I'll just read this out to you. But they can read the book. That's okay. We should just talk. Before getting to the idolatry point, I do want to address what you said in passing there, this question of what do we call these guys? Do we call them human? We're humans. They're not like us, whatever. And I think that that's one of the beautiful things about this is that they are called humans. The difference between us and them is not that we're human and they're not, or they're human and we're not. The difference is that we belong to two entirely different, unrelated branches of the human family. And so we distinguish ourselves not on the basis of who's human and who isn't, but on the basis of whether you're part of Adam's family or Taurus family. And Adam's family all have this big familial problem of sin, and Taurus family do not, and they have a whole different relationship. But I think that Taurus family rightly would look at us and call us their brothers, not just in the way in which St. Francis might call, the son his brother, but rather in a robust way of, we have the same blood pumping through our veins.
Even if they haven't seen theirs.
Right, exactly right. On Malacandra, Ransom has trouble understanding the poetry of the Chrossa because the meter of it is timed to a different type of heartbeat, a different type of blood. He wouldn't have that problem with the Perelandran poetry. He would have different problems, namely that he can't see far enough to understand what they're talking about. But the meter of it would make sense because our bloods are the same, right? So Lewis has a wonderful image here of, and this is a really, really important aspect of, I would say, both Platonic Christianity, Christian Platonism, as well as just of a good, robust Imago Dei theology, which grounds things like sacraments and things like icons and this other sort of stuff, which is that there's a kind of a dead image and a living image. And a living image, what makes it alive is that it's bound very tightly to the original. So imagine a portrait of yourself. And it was taken 5 years ago on a sunny day in a particular place. And maybe, you have a nice beard now. Maybe you didn't have that then. Maybe you were clean shaven for the portrait, right? And so if I look at the portrait today, first of all, I might not recognize you without the facial hair, but certainly it hasn't changed. It's a snapshot of what you look like to that artist in that moment in time. It's a dead picture because it's constrained by you and all of its particulars. He's painting you, and so that controls how he's doing it. But at the same time, it's unbound from you in the sense that your subsequent destiny has no impact on it. A living portrait, by contrast, would be one that would continually change to reflect the way that you look now. If I had a living portrait of you up in my house, then I could tell what you look like right now by looking at it and seeing it updated. It's sort of like, the video cameras we have going now where you're being updated in real time. In order for that to be true, there has to be an abiding relationship between the work of art and the original. And that relationship is not equal-sided. The work of art is dependent on the original and it's changing according to it. Lewis is making the argument that when you have that kind of living image that has that sort of real relationship, living, ongoing relationship with its original, you're not in any danger of forgetting that this is the copy. This is where we depart from the portrait because the portrait is trying to look exactly like you, whereas this face is not trying to look exactly like Christ. is trying to look like Christ in a Tor kind of way, which is different than a Teenagel kind of way, which will be different than Tor's son will look. And nevertheless, it's so to be Tor is so truly to be an image of God, and specifically of Christ, that he says that when you look at his face, it was the face that no one can claim not to know. The face that lies at the bottom of our hearts and at the back of our dreams and underneath all of our fears. The face of Perelandra above all, Perelandra the young, right? Yeah, it's just really beautiful the way he ties all of those things together.
When I read that section in preparation for our episode, it put me in mind of the section in Matthew where Jesus is talking about the final judgment. And when you visited me, when you fed me, when you clothed me, when you gave me something to drink, you did it. The least of these, you did it to me. And it struck me reading this description of Tor and Teenagel. It's like, this is just that amped up and just made really, really clear. Christians are actually meant to treat each other like Christ.
Yeah.
Because Jesus tells us to do so. Yeah. St. John says, you can't claim to love God if you don't love your neighbor.
Yeah.
Because there is that abiding connection between the two things. And the other thought that I considered was that Lewis in the Four Loves, when we're talking about disordered loves, which is one of the things that idolatry is.
Yeah.
Idolatry is fixed by loving the right things more. In the same way, if you make your job your idol, it should really be fixed, not by loving your job less, but by loving other things that deserve your love more, your family, God. There's sort of a lesson in there of seeing the divine glory in Tor and realizing I am called to love Tor and Teenagel, but I'm called to love even more the image that I'm seeing through them.
Yeah, what's fascinating that at the beginning of that passage, Ransom says to them, do not raise me up. And what he's referencing is the chivalric notion that the higher social class comes and places their hand on you and lifts you up from a low position. And it is a condescension because they can just command you to get up. But by putting their hand on you and raising you up, it shows special favor and special love. And he can tell that they want to do it. And he's like, hang on, don't do it yet. I need to abide in this place for a minute because for the first time in my life, I'm seeing where I properly fit in the hierarchy of things. And I don't want you to take that from me too soon. That's a very powerful moment that it's not that he's never wants to be raised up or he's incapable of being their presence, but he needs some more time to inhabit and understand this space that he's brought into by seeing them properly. And I think that's what you mean. It's trying to keep those loves properly ordered. If you raise me up too quickly, then that's going to push me back into that love of self. That's my core problem. Let me spend a little bit more time rectifying my love by gazing upon you, right? And gazing upon you rectifies my love for God because you're such a clear image of God that I can't love you without realizing that I love you because you look like him.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, one of the key things that happens in this chapter is we find out that Tor and Teenagel are basically taking over the family business. And part of that is that the title of Oyarsa passes to them.
Yeah. That's a big moment, right? I think this is a development, it seems to me, in Lewis's thinking from Out of the Silent Planet.
Oh, yeah. He had not thought of this before. I'm absolutely convinced.
That's exactly right. Especially, at the beginning, the elder, he seems very keen to distance them from angels. And the further he goes along, the less sense that makes. But I think that this is great. And this is a good thing that happens to writers and I think this is especially true to writers who are writing theologically, to where you're being guided in the choices you're making in your fiction by theological constraints. And that means that you have these discoveries about what the meaning of what you're saying is that go beyond what you had in mind when you first started up. And so, yeah, I think originally in Oyarsa, the notion was something like an archangel. And that was, the one who ruled. In medieval theology, there was an angel who ruled over each of the heavenly spheres and who kept it in motion and regulated its motion and kept it going the right speed and in the right direction and all these sorts of things. And the innovation here is the realization that that's like the word angel, which doesn't reference a nation, but rather a nature, but rather a job, right?
Messenger.
You're a messenger. Oyarsa is another one of those job terms, and it isn't only Eldila who can fulfill that role. And it's a really wonderful discovery because it's an expansion of our understanding of what it meant that we were given stewardship over creation before the fall. It shows us how incredibly deep and rich that authority could have been, while at the same time we don't have a ceremony like this where it's been handed over to us because we didn't reach the point where that could have happened. And so our stewardship over our world is stunted and it fights us. It produces weeds for us as part of the curse. Tor and Tindril have the ability to shape the world that they're in to a dramatic extent. The ability, the authority, and the responsibility all bound up in one.
Mm. And while humanity never reached that point of promotion, Scripture actually says that that's where we're going to end up.
Yeah.
In 1 Corinthians 6, it says, "Do you not know that the saints will judge the world?"
Yeah.
And in Revelation, it talks about, the 12 apostles on the 12 thrones, that this role is something that we are ultimately called to, but not now. And when we read Perelandra, we see plan A, so to speak, how this should have gone.
That's right. Something I hadn't thought of until just now is, as the incarnate God is walking around as both human and divine, and he is sinless human at any rate. It's a bigger question whether his humanity is unfallen or not. It certainly got some of the aspects of fallen humanity. You can kill it, but it's certainly sinless. He is the truest human we've ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
It's a question whether when he says, to the fig tree, be withered, bring forth fruit no more, is it responding to his divinity, or is it responding to something like that original human authority that we could have had we not fallen? In Jesus, the question is transcendent. It doesn't matter because they've been unified so closely that the one is the other. And maybe that's an image. Maybe that was part of what got into Lewis's head for this scene, an image of what it looks like when we are properly the image that we're meant to be, like we saw a second ago. Naturally, from that flows an effortless wielding of an authority that is divine, because we're the channel we're meant to be for that authority to flow into the world.
Yeah, the same man that named the animals had other authority over the living things.
That's good.
Yeah, I remember years ago, I really got fascinated by the question relating to Jesus's power. Was it in virtue of his own divinity, or was it his participation with the Holy Spirit in his humanity?
Yes.
And in the end, my brain exploded, and
that's right.
It's like I gave up. I'm sure there's a proper Thomistic response to that, but it is an interesting notion. And when we're talking about Jesus in his incarnation, one of the things that's interesting when you look back to the Old Testament, when you see the angel of the Lord, we said angel as messenger, is often seen as a pre-incarnate Christ, and so the angel has a title change, so to speak, and you see something similar to that in Perelandra in terms of the angel or Eldil that was the Oyarsa now becomes is now passed over to a human.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And the difference in their task. Originally, the Oyarsa of Perelandra had the responsibility of shepherding the young world until it could bring forth the species and the two individuals who could then take over as Oyarsa from it. Once that handover is completed, the Oyarsa of Perelandra, which, by the way, now the Oyarsa is two people, but they're one Oyarsa, I think.
They're ahad in the same way that man and woman become one flesh.
Exactly right. So there's a beautiful theology of marriage there. And you see that in the titles he gives them, right? Because he calls them, he says, Oyarsa Perelandri, the Adam, the crown, Tor and Tindril, Baru and Baruach. I think what he means there is the male and female forms of a word for blessed in Hebrew. Ask and Embla, Yatsur and Yatsura, dear to Maleldil. Only as the two together are they the one that is the Oyarsa, in the same way that only as divine and human is Jesus the Christ, who is the Messiah. So that's very fascinating and very powerful too. And I've talked myself out of what I was thinking about.
but also how male and female together image God.
Yes, yeah. Together they make the one image of God that humanity is. I think that's very important and a powerful idea Lewis has that he's taken a lot of flack for since his death.
There's more things that I'd want to say about that, but let's keep moving. There's bottomless depths on this chapter. The question of evil and how we see evil clearly in this chapter, or rather how Tor and Tindril see evil and understand it, but without giving into it.
Yeah. because one of the things that we've been watching all the way through this is Ransom is, at first he's afraid to say certain things to Tenedro because he doesn't want to be responsible for giving her a knowledge of evil that will cause her to fall. And he discovers pretty quickly that she's pretty safe in that regard. There's nothing he says that's going to make her fall. And then, of course, the whole temptation that the unman is offering is this kind of knowledge and wisdom that you're going to have, this experience of pain and death and loss and all this other kind of stuff, that you'll know it independently of Perelandra. And that's your, Perelandra wants you to do that. And of course, that's nonsense. He's the unman. Don't trust him. Finally, Ransom gets there and he says, I don't know if these guys know, do these guys know about evil? And Tor says, yeah, we know these things now. We got it. Okay. All that happened in your world, Perelandra has put into our mind. We have learned of evil, though not as the evil one wished us to learn. We have learned better than that and know it more. For it is waking that understands sleep and not sleep that understands waking. And so the very thing that we threw it all away for, which was this knowledge of good and evil, they got it, and they got it better than we did, because evil is best understood in relationship to the good. Since evil is not primary, not equivalent with the good, not some alternate principle in a yin-yang kind of way, but is a privation of good or a loss of good or a
twisting.
Yeah, some sort of parasite or perversion of the good. Then to understand what it really is, you got to understand what it's trying to be or what it should be. I think that's a really powerful notion.
And when I read this section, it put me in mind of the part in Mere Christianity where Jack is talking about Jesus. And he says, a silly idea is current that good people do not know what temptation means. This is an obvious lie. Only those who try to resist temptation know how strong it is. That is why bad people, in one sense, know very little about badness. They have lived a sheltered life by always giving in. We never find out the strength of the evil impulse inside us until we try to fight it. And so, particularly the Green Lady, she has understood all of these things in a way that she wouldn't have understood had she fallen. There's a line where Ransom, he says that, this wouldn't make sense on Earth, but then again, we've been evil for very long. That's when he discovers that he knows the word, that experiencing evil by committing it automatically brings with it the cloudiness, the all of the problems that evil brings.
Yeah.
It stunts your ability to actually understand it properly.
Yeah.
It's the Lady of the Green Kirtle and her song and her magic.
Yeah.
It causes you not to be able to see things clearly. But because she didn't fall, she is able to see it clearly without suffering the effects of that sin.
And so in that way, I was thinking about Lewis writing Screwtape Letters, that someone like Lewis is better equipped to write the Screwtape Letters than, say, a Satan worshiper would be.
Yes. For the very reason that he has knowledge of evil, but he himself is not twisted by it. He's not fooled by it.
Yeah, that's right. And there's the notion, this Mere Christianity, I thought of the same quote when I read this notion of its strength, right? How much strength does it possess? If you give in before you've resisted it all the way, you don't know how much strength is left. Did it just have one more punch to throw and then it was exhausted, or could it do this all day, right? But those who have resisted all the way to the end, they've seen the full extent of its power, and there is a peace with that. There's a sense of, right, it's not infinite. There is an end of its power, and however great it feels, if I stand firm, it'll wear itself out in a few minutes.
I think it's very appropriate that this episode is going out in the middle of Lent. So if you are thinking of giving in to your prayer, fasting, and almsgiving, hang in there.
That's right. Don't. That's our advice. When you think of sin, just don't.
Just don't.
What transitions naturally out of this is to, okay, so you've got this real man and real woman for the first time, and they've got the authority of Oyarsa now for the first time. What are you going to do with it?
Going to Disneyland.
That's right. Exactly what I was thinking. Except they don't have a Disneyland. We're going to build Disneyland, and then
they will be able to make Disneyland, but it will be an appropriate cost of entry.
That's right. That's right. It'll be free for all. It's fully subsidized by the government, which is not in any way evil. Ransom says that he's never met his father, which, that doesn't seem that weird to us, but it's a big deal because all of Tor's children will know Tor. There's not going to be anyone who will be able to say on Perelandra what Ransom has just said. They will always have their father and mother with them, both the father and mother of their race and their own individual fathers and mothers, and so on and so forth. You can just walk down the line talking to all of your ancestors. Tor plots out a path that he's apparently come up with in about 3 seconds for the future history of his world. I don't marvel that he comes up with it so quickly, partly because his intellect, being unfallen, is so much more rapid and effective and everything than penetrating than ours is. But also because, as he says, Maleld was constantly putting stuff into his mind. His mind is open to what God wants to say to it all the time. And so there's always this influx of new information. And he says, okay, we're going to go around the sun 10,000 times, and that's going to be the length of our history. And during that time, these are the various things that we're going to do and whatnot. It occurred to me, this was the first time I thought of this in preparing for this conversation, that Venus has a shorter orbit around the sun than the Earth does, which they knew in Lewis's time. There's so much astronomy they didn't know, but they did know that. And so I calculated how long that would take, and it's about 6,100 years, which is pretty similar to the estimates of how much time there has been since the beginning of Genesis to our day, if you just take the Old Testament as presenting the full thing.
Chronological time, yeah.
Yeah. So Lewis has chosen 10,000, which is a very significant number in its own right. But he's perhaps also chosen that in order to say that in the same amount of time that we have done what we've done in human history, coming up to where this novel comes out, they are going to uplift the other animals so that unintelligent species become intelligent species, and they're going to explore the entire world all the way down to its very depths. We're about 30% of the way through that project in our world.
I'm pretty sure Elon Musk is putting chips into animals, making them talk. That's imminent.
Right. That's right. And then at the end, of course, he'll rip the sky open. They'll remove the cloud cover that covers Venus, so that for the first time, his people will be able to see the stars. And for them, their history culminates in they're raising an army to come out into the solar system and join in our day of judgment and overthrow Satan and the power that's been established on the moon. It's really fascinating. You talked earlier about a plan A for how creation could have gone. And so now we see a plan A for how history could have gone subsequent to that moment, right? I've often wondered this, how would the world be if there weren't death and if we hadn't fallen? And Lewis gave me my first plausible picture of that.
And you've mentioned about their own immortality. The church fathers, when they talk about the garden and the 2 trees, they pretty much all seem to take it for granted that Adam and Eve would have got to eat from the tree of life had they ultimately passed their test. But yeah, here we see the worlds colliding, so to speak, at an apocalypsis. In the book of Revelation is the apocalypse, the unveiling. Well, what's going to unveil on Perelandra is like the curtain between them and the heavens is going to come down, and then they're going to come and help in the fight.
Yeah, I love that image.
It's pretty wild.
Warriors from every other inhabited planet in the system riding to Earth to help liberate us from the forces of evil. What a powerful image of the way that God brings them into even that work, right? We're very familiar with humans being brought into the work of the coming kingdom, but this is another level of human beings and ultimately Hrasa and Sorns and everything else becoming a part of that work. It's very expansive.
And it's a little bit of foreshadowing for that hideous strength. We try and avoid spoilers, so I'm just going to say this is like the idea of talking animals coming and joining in a final fight. We're going to see that again.
The idea of the solar system coming to get involved, what we're doing here, we're going to see that again.
Yeah, exactly. Given everything that we learn about Perelandra and the transfer of this title of Oyarsa to the humans that are there, what do we make of the history of Malacandra? Because they still have their Oyarsa, and he still seems to be in charge.
Yeah, that's right.
There doesn't seem to be an original pair to whom that title was transferred.
Yeah.
And when we learn about the history of Malacandra, we know that Satan tried to attack, and the Oyarsa fought back.
Yeah.
So why do you think that this transfer of power never happened there?
Oh, gosh, it's so good. I love it. I think I've never thought of this before. This is fantastic. I think 2 things. The first thing is to know the difference between a couple of differences between Malacandra and Perelandra. Malacandra is older than Perelandra, and it's older even than Thulcandra in terms of its history. And so I think that's relevant because their history was already going before our fall happened. And the other thing is that there are 3 rational species. There are 3 canal species on Malacandra rather than just one. And they do not seem to have been made for one to rule over the others. They were made to complement one another. And so we see you've got the singers, the poets, you've got who are the Khorasa, you've got the scientists who are the Sorns, and then you've got the artists who are the Flifiltrigi. And I think it's meant to be this triangle where all 3 complement one another. And so no one of them or no one pair of them could be Oyarsa. Here's another thing that comes to mind, though. This is the second thing. And this lies in the fact that, the reason why the Torah and Tenedril are human is since the incarnation has happened.
Excellent. Good. I hope you're going this. This was the theory that I presented in our episode. This is why I think it changes.
Well, there you go. Yeah. So there's one form that Hnau has to take going forward now. And so you're not going to have that tripod of Hnau like you had before. All Hnau is going to be human. And so I think that in part because of the fact that you only have one rational species, but in part because now you belong to the species that Meleldo himself became.
And you're part of the body as well.
Yeah.
In the same way that Ransom was called to save the Green Lady because he is part of the body of Christ.
Yes.
It is now through this that Christ is saving Perelandra.
Yeah.
I think there's a similar idea in terms of if the destination of the saints is to judge the world, then it'll be the same for the Green Man and the Green Lady to become the Oyarsa.
That's right. In any future worlds with Hnau, in this universe, they will be human, and I would expect them to become Oyarsa in a way that had never happened before. There's also an interesting thing there. This is maybe a little bit racy for some people, but essentially what you have here, it's a priestly function. It's the Oyarsa is both king and priest and prophet for the world. And those are titles that are given to Christ throughout Scripture. And then he's imaged in various ways through Old Testament figures of prophet, priest, and king. Melchizedek is a very outstanding example of this. And the Catholic Church will talk about the priest as being in persona Christi. And because of that, he stands before the congregation like Christ. And then there's his physical resemblance to Christ, which goes all the way to his masculinity, is part of his role as being in persona Christi. Here we have in persona Meleldili represented in the union of male and female, not in the male only or the female only or something like that. And so that does open the idea that, I think that if they have priests on Perelandra, they don't really need them because they've got their high priest and their high priestess, but they have a high priest and a high priestess. They have male and female clergy, as it were, because of the nature of the situation. I wouldn't, to push back against those who might get excited about that, the disanalogies between Perelandra and our world are pretty strong. And so I don't know that I would draw any conclusions for what would have to be the case here, but it is an interesting way of playing with that notion of in persona Christi and what does it take to image the person of Christ.
I'll support that, at least in one particular direction, that I would say the Genesis account presents Adam as a priest. Mm-hmm. The creation account of the world is the building of a cosmic temple in which Adam is in the Holy of Holies. He is in the garden.
Yeah.
And the verbs used to describe his function is usually rendered something like to tend and to till or something like that. Those are the same verbs that were used to describe the functions of the Levitical priesthood. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You can certainly tap into a priestly idea in Genesis, and I think there are enough hints also in Perelandra that you could connect them. But quite how you connect them, I think you've got some latitude.
Yeah, and he's Adam really refers to both the humans. It's not until we get to Ish and Isha that we separate them into male and female. And so that's another point about this Perelandra business, is that the fundamental, the primal unity of Torah and Tenedril as one agent for God in the world is consistent with what we get in the first of the 2 creation accounts in Genesis.
Yeah, because you not only have them not falling, you also have them their own unity preserved, whereas in the Genesis account, they immediately turn on each other.
That's right.
Well, in the time we've got left, let's try and talk about the great dance, the great dance itself. It's about a third of the chapter. I've actually been reading the poetic version that was put out by Ruth Pitter in response to reading Perelandra. I actually found that more instructive, to read her verse and then come back to Lewis.
That is a wonderful idea. I hadn't thought about that. It's actually very fitting that we haven't got loads and loads and loads of time to talk about the Great Dance, because the point of it is not to express it all exhaustively, but to just enter into it and let your mind start wheeling. At the end of the Divine Comedy, Dante, when he gets the vision of the Trinity and of the Incarnation, those mysteries, his mind sort of gets to reeling and he's sort of blissed out. And there's this sense that and he says that he's being moved, he's being rotated, as it were, by the same love that moves the sun and the other stars. It's as if he's been set into orbit along with all these other things in contemplation of this. And that's really what the great dance ought to do to us as well.
It's swept up.
That's right. One aspect of it that I think is very cool and that has to be kept in mind as qualifying everything that's said is you can't tell who is saying what at any point. Even Ransom, who's a part of it, doesn't know who is saying what. And that means that this praise is being drawn equally from the Eldila who are present and from the unfallen humans, the confirmed in grace humans who are present, and from the fallen man who is present, that all five of them are able to enter into this praise and seamlessly offer one bit, they're part of it. It's kind of like being at a spontaneous prayer meeting, right? Where you just sort of popcorn prayer and let everyone go around and say things, except that it's absolutely seamless and everyone's exactly on the same page and that sort of a thing. This is a moment where they sort of transcend themselves because they're all being blown by the same spirit in that moment. They're all one instrument being played by the spirit in order to express this praise and this final thing. And I think that if you don't keep that in mind, you lose an important aspect of this dance.
And the not knowing who's doing what is actually very characteristic of a dance. I've done a lot of salsa, a lot of swing, a lot of ballroom. You would say, who did that turn? Well, I suppose it's sort of the lady's turn, but the leader led it. They're connected. The thing that makes the turn look beautiful is the fact that they are a couple that are connected. And it's that flowing in and out of each other that is the thing that really, it's the thing that dancers particularly enjoy. And I'd say it's the thing that also makes it look so beautiful.
So would you say that at a moment like that, they go into a particular move and yeah, you could technically say that the man led it, but really it's that both of them recognized in that moment they wanted to go there and both seamlessly went there, trusting that the other person saw that was the place to go next as well.
I mean, technically you could talk about an invitation and a response, but the thing is, when you are dancing with somebody that you are so in tune with, it sort of blurs together. It's like a married couple that have lived together for a long time. They finish each other's sentences and sandwiches. And so I think there is that almost the intuition when everyone's, to sound kind of a little hippie, when you're resonating on the same frequency. But the other thing that strikes me about that line is it makes me think of the Viennese waltz, because there you are rotating around a common pole that is the point where the two of you actually meet. And so there's something wonderful, particularly with that style of dance, where is the focus? It's actually neither dancer is focused on themselves or even on the other. It's almost to a third. And, when theologians have described the Trinity itself as this form of dance, it's also self-effacing. It doesn't look towards itself, but towards the other.
Yeah. That's really nice. And I think that the notion of, this great dance, Lewis must have in mind that patristic notion of perichoresis, the Trinitarian person's interpenetration that is so rich that it's constantly, the Father gives away all that he is to the Son and the Holy Spirit, and at the same time he receives all that the Son and the Holy Spirit are back from them, and there's this constant going out and stepping back. And I think that the best passage about this is at the very end of the dance when the words are transformed into sight for Ransom, and it's as if he's watching it happen. And he says that he sees all these different figures, which are the dancers that they've been talking about. Each figure, as he looked at it, became the master figure or focus of the whole spectacle, by means of which his eye disentangled all else and brought it into unity. Now, this is the key that interprets everything. This is the most important part. Only to be itself entangled when he looked to what he had taken for mere marginal decorations and found that there also the same hegemony was claimed and the claim made good. So you look at what this thing ties it all together. You can really understand this over here because of, wait, no, this is the thing that ties it all together. And that really makes sense of, no, wait, that's what ties it all together. And importantly, yet the former pattern not thereby dispossessed, but finding in its new subordination a significance greater than that which it had abdicated. So this seems like the most important thing And then you realize it's not. And by seeing how it's not the most important thing this other thing is, it makes the first thing that much more important. And that keeps happening for everything, so that everything continually is one-upping everything else, not in a competitive way, but in a joyous giving place to the others. That wraps up the notion of humility, the notion of the greatest will be the servant of all, so tightly.
Mm-hmm.
When I was a younger Christian, I thought, okay, if I want to be the greatest Christian, right, I've just got to serve everybody. If I'm the least, then I'll get to be the greatest, which is, of course, not how you get to be the least, by wanting to be the greatest, right? You can't do it that way. But this helps me to understand what Christ is really on about there, that the least becomes the greatest, and then becomes the least, and then becomes the greatest, and then becomes the least. And that's the way in which the kingdom of God moves forward eternally.
And the example we have is Christ himself, who, though he was in the form of God, did not deem equality with God something to be grasped. Rather, he emptied himself, taking the form of a servant. And at the end of that Carmen Christi song is, and therefore he was raised, and at his name every knee shall bow.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's my favorite verse.
We could talk about this forever, but any final thoughts before we wrap up?
I would really encourage readers, as you go back to this book over and over again, as you go back to this chapter over and over again, almost, again, this is coming out in Lent. Maybe this is a great Lenten discipline too, to grab each paragraph and take each paragraph and say, today I'm going to meditate on this paragraph of the great dance. Right. So today my paragraph is dust. The dust itself, which is scattered so rare in heaven, where of all worlds and the bodies that are not worlds are made, is at the center. And just that's going to be my meditation for the day. It's a practice of trying to do what Ransom said he saw at the end, letting each thing appear as the most important thing for that day and moving successively through them. Because I will say this last chapter will repay as much energy as we want to put into it. It is an unbelievable accomplishment how in a book that's very dense, as you mentioned, everything's packed in so tightly. It's like everything's packed in 10 times as tightly in this final chapter.
Yeah. I found this chapter exhausting, but I've probably now read it twice as many times as I've read all of the other chapters in trying to prepare for it.
Yeah.
And I still think I've barely scratched the surface.
I think that's right for me too.
Well, Dr. Johnson, thank you so much for your time today. And to wrap up, can you please tell people where they can find out more about you, the podcasts that you're on, classes that you give, all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, so if you want to see more of my work that's available online, podcasts and essays and things like that, head over to juniusjohnson.com. And I do offer a lot of courses for adults on matters like the theology of beauty, theology of the imagination. We have courses on C.S. Lewis coming up this summer, reading some of his works. All of that stuff can be found at academics.juniusjohnson.com.
And the podcast that you're on?
I am a co-host of the Classical Mind podcast with Father Wesley Walker, who's an Anglican priest. And every month we read a different classic work from the Western canon and talk about it. And so you can head over to the Classical Mind over on Substack to follow us there.
In fact, the last time I was clearing my driveway, I was listening to you trying to convince me that I should read the Communist Manifesto. I would say you did a great job, but I'm still going to say I think communism bad.
Well, in the end, I'm going to have to agree with you.
Well, I hear the call for final drinks, so thanks to our intern Julia and our sound engineers Taylor and Sarah, and of course to Dr. Johnson for joining us today. I'd also like to thank all of our Patreon supporters, particularly our top tier supporters, Dan, Jody, Robert, Mark, Mary Margaret, Rowdy, Angela, David, Peter, Kate, James, John, Sarah, Rebecca, Megan, Brian, Joanna, Kelly, Stephen, Gary, Paul, Kay, Becca, Shane, Thomas, Amanda, Joelle, Erica, Matt, James, Bud 1, Bud 2, Edgar, Aldo, Kevin, Mark, and of course, all of you for listening. So please join us next time when we'll continue going further up
and further in.
Cheers!
Cheers!